Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. This one you guys sent in is pretty wild. It's about Argentina, Argentina's economy,
Yeah.
and specifically how they went from like crazy high inflation to a budget surplus, like
Yeah.
seemingly overnight.
Yeah.
So we've got a People's Gazette article here. We've got a Reddit thread that's like super active,
Oh, wow.
all about this new president, Javier Milei.
Okay.
So is this like a success story?
Right.
Or is this a total disaster waiting to happen? Or is it, somewhere in between?
Yeah.
Let's try to unpack it all.
It's definitely it's a big change for them. Historically Argentina has been really influenced by Peronism, which is, all about social safety nets and government intervention in the economy.
Yeah, for sure. And Milei's approach is like the opposite of that.
Oh yeah, completely. Total opposite.
The Gazette, they call it chainsaw austerity. And honestly, I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
He sold off presidential planes. He really cut down on the number of government vehicles.
Yeah.
And he even fired his own labor minister for
Yeah.
giving out raises.
Oh wow.
So, I mean, is that just for show? Or did those moves actually have a real impact?
I think it's got to be a bit of both, right? Like the symbolism's huge. He's showing that he's serious about cutting spending, but those actions by themselves, they wouldn't have solved the root problem. The root problem is inflation.
Right, because before Milei got in there,
Mm.
Argentina's inflation rate was over 200%.
Oh my God.
The article, it even said that supermarkets were changing prices daily.
No way.
Can you imagine going grocery shopping and seeing totally different prices every day?
It must have been so destabilizing, for businesses, for consumers, everyone.
Yeah.
So Milei, he focused on cutting spending, obviously, stopping the printing of new money, and reducing subsidies. So these were direct attacks on the things driving inflation, and it eventually brought it down to 2.7%.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a huge change.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Reddit thread shows not everyone's throwing a party.
Right.
Some people are praising Milei.
Yeah.
He's a hero.
Yeah.
But others are really worried about how these cuts are impacting people, day to day.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing to remember. The Gazette, they focus on, okay, balanced budget, lower inflation, great. But they don't really go into the social side effects, what are the consequences for people?
Exactly. We need to think about that too. What are people actually experiencing?
Yeah.
How are these policies affecting, their actual lives?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you look at the Reddit thread, some people are saying oh, things are actually getting better. Businesses are opening up, the economy's growing.
Okay.
But then other people are no, I've lost my health care. I can't afford basic things anymore.
Oh.
Poverty's getting worse. It's
Yeah.
two different pictures.
Yeah, it is. And that's what makes it so interesting. There's this one comment on Reddit, and they said that Argentina's economic history is uniquely messed up.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
They've had all these booms and busts
Yeah.
a lot because of, political instability, mismanagement. So it makes you wonder, are Miley's extreme actions, are they the necessary thing in the situation, or is it a dangerous gamble?
Right. Because, I mean, if Argentina's situation really is that unique,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe just using standard economic theory, shock therapy or austerity, maybe that's not the answer.
Yeah, you have to think about that because there are always trade-offs in economics. I mean, yeah, Miley's policies, they might be working now in the short term, but what about the long term? What if all these cuts just lead to more inequality, social unrest, and end up hurting the stability he's trying to create?
Okay, so we've got this incredibly complex situation. A president, they call him Chainsaw. He's taking these radical steps to fix this economy
Yeah.
that everyone's saying is uniquely messed up.
Yeah.
And, people have all sorts of different reactions to it.
Yeah.
So let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to really dig into the potential consequences of Milei's approach and what it could mean for Argentina going forward.
Okay, sounds good.
So we're still trying to figure out this whole thing in Argentina, these big economic changes, this president they call Chainsaw.
Right.
And people seem to have totally mixed reactions. You were saying earlier that what makes this case so interesting is that Argentina's economic history is, you said it's uniquely messed up.
Right.
Could you talk more about that?
Yeah.
What makes it so different?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of things. It's they've had this cycle of booms and busts for decades, And a lot of that's tied to commodity prices,
Yeah.
global economic trends, that kind of thing. But then there are also like deeper problems, structural issues. Like they have a history of protectionist policies that kind of like stifle competition and innovation.
Okay, and then there's Peronism, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's not just like an economic policy. It's almost like a cultural thing.
Yeah, it's huge in Argentina. So like how does that play into all of this? It's actually really interesting because it's like so ingrained in their society. It's this mix of populism, social justice, economic nationalism, and for decades it led to like nationalizing industries, strong unions, generous social programs, but it also like created this system that some people say was just not sustainable. It led to these cycles of inflation and debt.
So Miley's basically coming in and doing the opposite of everything Peronism stands for.
In a lot of ways, yeah, he's like all about free markets, privatization, smaller government. So it's a radical change and it's causing a lot of uncertainty. Some people in Argentina, they see it as like a necessary break from the past,
Yeah.
a chance to finally have a stable economy. But then others are like really worried about what it'll mean for society.
Yeah. And that brings us back to that Reddit thread.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
we have people saying their lives are actually better now under Milei, but then others are saying it's way worse. Like, how do those two things even exist at the same time?
It's important to remember that, like, economic data doesn't always tell the whole story, Yeah, inflation might be down, which is great, but that doesn't really show how it's affecting each person. Like someone who depended on government subsidies, those cuts could be really bad for them, even if the overall economy is technically doing better.
It's like there were two different Argentinas now.
Yeah, it's a real risk. And it's something that we've seen in other countries that like went through these really fast economic transitions. You mentioned shock therapy before, that's what they call it. When a country switches to a market economy really quickly, sometimes it can be kind of chaotic. Like think about Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. It was pretty crazy.
Right, and it did have some success, but there were huge costs for people too. Inequality went way up, corruption was everywhere, and a lot of people felt like they were just left behind.
So the big question for Argentina is, can they avoid those same problems?
Right.
Can they do these reforms, but make sure everyone benefits, not just a few people?
That's the challenge. It's like they're walking this tightrope, too much government, you get instability, but too much austerity, too much focus on the numbers. You could end up with a society that's really divided and unequal.
So how do we even know if Miley's doing the right thing? Like, what should we be looking at? Is it just inflation and GDP?
Well, we need to look at things like social mobility. Like, are people able to move up economically? Are they getting education, healthcare? We also need to look at, like, trust in the government. Do people believe the government is actually working for them?
So it's not just about, like, the economics. It's about whether society is actually healthy.
Right.
If people feel like they're part of the system, if they believe in the future of their country.
Exactly. And that's often missing from these, like, purely economic analyses. You have to consider the people, like the social fabric of the country.
All right, so we've got this incredibly complex situation, right? A president who's, like, going all in on these changes to fix an economy that everyone says is a mess. And people have totally different opinions about it. We've talked about shock therapy, austerity, and like how we can't forget about the people.
Yeah.
So let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll look at what a sustainable economic policy might look like for a place like Argentina. And maybe like what lessons this whole thing might have for other countries dealing with similar stuff. Okay, so we've been talking about Argentina, their economic roller coaster. President Milei, his pretty bold moves, right? It's complicated, a lot of layers.
Yeah, no easy answers.
No easy answers, but I'm curious. What do you think about all this?
That's the best question. We've gone through different views, economic ideas, historical examples, all that. Now, like, what about you? What stands out from all of this?
Because it's not just about Argentina, is it? It's about how, these economic decisions affect people's lives everywhere.
Exactly.
It's what the choices governments make, the trade-offs.
Yeah, for sure. And think about where you live, your own country. Are there similar things going on there? Debates about spending, social safety nets, the free market?
Yeah. Can we, like, learn anything from Argentina? One thing that I keep thinking about is unintended consequences. Milei, he wanted to fix their economy. And in some ways he has, right? Like, short term, it's impressive. But we talked about those long-term risks. What if this ends up with more inequality, more social unrest.
That's why we have to look beyond the numbers, the human element, What happens when people feel left behind?
Yeah. How do you make sure the economy grows? But people are still doing okay.
Right. It's tough.
You said Argentina's situation is uniquely messed up.
I did. Does that mean, there's no way to fix it, no blueprint? Is every country just kind of winging it?
Well, there's definitely no one-size-fits-all solution. Every country's different, right? Different challenges, different opportunities. But we can learn from history, both good and bad.
What about those Reddit comments, People had such different experiences, some good, some bad. How do we... It shows how important nuance is. Data gives you the big picture. But it's the individual stories that really matter. Those show you the real impact. So be careful about those big generalizations. Remember, there's always more than one side to things.
Okay, so big question. Is there a middle ground between too much government spending and the kind of, extreme cuts Milei's doing?
I think it's about finding balance, something that works long term. You want growth, but you also want opportunity for everyone. Social mobility. A system that people trust, that's transparent.
And that needs informed citizens, right?
Yeah.
People who are involved, who ask questions, who, challenge what they're told.
That's what makes this so important, these deep dives. It's not just about giving information. It's about thinking critically, making up your own mind, being part of these conversations.
So as we're wrapping this up, one last question for you, our listeners.
Yeah.
What do you think about Argentina's big experiment? What can other countries learn from it?
Keep thinking about those questions. As you keep learning and exploring, there's always more to discover.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another interesting topic. Until then, keep learning.